Thank you everyone for coming out to my public speaking informative speech. Over 1,100 people. That is equivalent to the number of male seniors enrolled in classes on campus at BYU, Idaho. This amount is the same amount of people that died sacrificing their lives, wishing that death would come upon them to relieve them of pain on the USS Arizona during the attacks at Pearl Harbor. These statistics and information I learned throughout my research of Pearl Harbor and the events of World War II, as well as during my basic training at Naval Station Great Lakes. The power behind 1,100 people seems like a lot of people, but it's even more powerful when you know the story of one individual. Don Stratton, a survivor of the Arizona, told his story in a memoir that he published. "If we do not learn from history, we are often doomed to repeat it," is a famous quote that I've heard throughout the years of my life. And that is why I decided to talk about those tragic events of Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway, and Doolittle's raid, and how it ended those events through the dropping of the atomic bomb. The Arizona, as many might not know, was actually not supposed to be there during the attacks at Pearl Harbor. About 2 months before, it received orders to go home to its home port in Bremerton, Washington, and it was scheduled that everyone was going to be home for Christmas. Sailors were excited. They get to be home with their families after many long months away from them. And as they were traveling to Washington, the weather conditions were not the greatest. There was a great amount of fog, which caused the Arizona to collide with another ship, causing massive damage. So with that massive damage, they ended up having to go back to Pearl Harbor to receive repairs so that it can go back into operation. During that time as well, the Japanese were rising to power. They thought that they can take over the world. They started taking over the smaller islands in the Pacific, and it was at an economic point of history where they thought that they could take over. And so because of those events, the U.S. decided to cut off supplies of rubber and other resources from Japan, which made them angry. Because of that, the Japanese saw the United States as a threat, and they claimed Hawaii being a dagger pointing at their neck. And because Hawaii was such a stronghold for the Navy, that was why they chose Pearl Harbor first. As we zoom forward, or fast forward in history, to December 7th, in the early morning at around 3 a.m., a couple hours before the attacks, the U.S. radar picked up about 400 aircraft. The junior sailor reported this to a senior officer, and it was reported as, "Oh, don't worry about it. People are just out there doing their exercise, and code green, all is well. Go back to your duties." A couple hours later, to 0751, where the attacks happened, radar picked up over 400 aircraft. At this point, it was too late. The Japanese were already well on their way, dropping bombs and torpedoes on ships, aircraft, buildings, hospitals, whatever they can find. These explosions sunk, capsized, and turned Battleship Row, as well as many other ships, into a pile of melted steel. This pile of melted steel ended up turning the water into oil, freezing over in the cold Pacific. The attack happened for 110 minutes later. Hospitals were being flooded with victims, and these events launched the U.S. into World War II. Another 6 months later after that, we entered into the Battle of Midway. That was a about a 3 to 4 day battle, and it was a major turning point in the war. It boosted morale for the military and for everyone in the home front of America. At the end of the battle, the Japanese lost about 4 carriers, over 200 aircraft, and the death toll rose to over 3,000. The U.S., on the other hand, lost 1 carrier, only 150 aircraft, and approximately 300 deaths. 300 is a lot, but compared to 3,000, it was seen as a major turning point. Later on, towards the end of the war, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle organized what was known as the Doolittle's Raid. The backstory behind this was he had several B-25 bombers from the United States Army loaded on board the USS Hornet, and it was the first time in history that bombers were launched off of the aircraft. It was a dangerous mission. They weren't sure if it was going to succeed, and this is the scene from the movie Pearl Harbor that everyone is well familiar with. They had to strip everything out to make the bomber light and pack as much oil, or fuel, as they could to make it to the islands of Japan, since enemies started detecting them early. The mission ended up a success. The bombers dropped bombs on the heart of Japan, taking out factories, buildings, and whatever they could in sight to get back at the Japanese. The Japanese, though, however, after all they went through, still did not learn their lesson, and they thought that they were still powerful and continued to attack. The U.S. sent them a message, and this is when the Manhattan Project came in to develop the atomic bomb. The first atomic bomb was dropped in Japan, and it caused severe damage to that country. They continued to attack. We sent them another warning and dropped another bomb on the country of Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese finally gave in, surrendered, and the war was ended while the treaty was signed in 1945 aboard the USS Missouri. Our nation owes a great debt of gratitude for these men and women of World War II, as well as all other wars that our country has fought in to defend our freedoms, and for what our service members do. Men of the U.S. Navy have fought gallantly and with honor, courage, and commitment during these times. Since World War II, our nation always answers the call, and they have used the history from the past to continue to fight and defend our country's freedoms so that we will not be infringed upon by our enemies. Studying history found a newfound respect for men at Pearl Harbor and World War II, and I hope that y'all have done the same as well. And now, with that, I hope that we can go and continue to study history so that we can learn from our past and continue to improve our future so that we can always protect and defend the freedoms of America that we do enjoy in these days, and that history will not be repeated. Thank you.